You are listening to the Barbara May Show, the place where we discuss all that really matters. We will cover all you need to know about lifestyle, health, spirituality, and plus so much more. Are you ready? Let's dive in. You are listening to episode 17 with Dr. Vera Tarman. Dr. Vera Tarman is a medical addictionist specialist and Medical Director of RenasENT, an inpatient drug and alcohol treatment center in Canada, as well as the author of Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction. In this episode, we will talk about addictions, mainly sugar addiction, and how to overcome it. I am so honored to have Dr. Tarman on my podcast and share her knowledge through this episode. And I really hope that this episode will make a change. Let's dive in. Welcome, Vera. Thank you very much for coming on my podcast. I'm very happy to have you here. My first question for you is, what are you grateful for?
Oh my gosh, I should have thought about that. Well, I'm grateful that I'm in a position where you are interested in hearing what I have to say. I'm grateful that I'm a clinician that, I can say some things that a lot of people think, but just by virtue of being a physician, people are more inclined to listen to me. And I'm really grateful I'm in that position because I want this message to be heard.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful. Before we dive in, I just want to tell you that I'm so grateful for your book, Food Junkie.
Oh, thank you.
After I read the book, I just was amazed because I have realized that I have addictions. And I enjoyed it so much. And exactly what you said, I think is very important to get this message out there.
Yeah, when you said that, it made me think that, you have addictions and there's such a stigma around that word. And I've had many people say, how can, why would you add the word stigma or another word, another label like addiction to somebody who might already be suffering from obesity or might be suffering from diabetes? Like, why do you want to add another thing to it? And I think that as long as we're afraid of that word, we're going to miss the boat of all the tools and all the, there's so much self-loathing that goes with that. And if we actually recognize what addiction is, food addiction is, then there's much less self-loathing. Once you get over this word addiction and actually recognize that pretty much everybody in 2021 is addicted to something. And if they're not, it's because they're doing all the self-care stuff that we preach about. But not that many people actually do it until they know that they have to because they've discovered they're addicted. So yeah, good. I'm glad that you're willing to use that word.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I was going through, when I was reading a book, I was going through my addictions in the past, and I was thinking, I used to be addicted to drugs. I used to be addicted to coffee. I used to be, well, I'm actually still addicted to coffee. I used to be addicted to smoking. I used to be addicted to sugar, fat, which I am still as well. And it just makes you think, like, what can we do about addiction? How can we move forward? How do we understand the brain? How do we understand, is addiction, like exactly what you said in the book, is addiction a choice or is it a disease? You're talking about serotonin, a lot, dopamine and endorphin. So I'll let you to explain it a little bit later on a podcast. But what I wanted to understand is that all those chemicals, how do we balance it? Where do we go from there? How do we overcome addictions?
Well, the first thing is just to embrace that word and that world. Maybe that's a better way to say it, that whole world, and just embrace the whole concept of it, because it then invites recovery solutions that otherwise we wouldn't have. We would just say, just stop and use willpower, and the willpower doesn't work. So, if we can acknowledge that anybody and everybody has the potential to become addicted, because we're just human animals living in an environment that is very obesophilic. Like, so much is out there that can snare us, and it's so easy to stumble from one to another to another. And if we just acknowledge that happens and then understand how, like I said, the self-loathing goes and then the tools go. And your podcast, your invitation for me to look at this from a spiritual angle is really thrilling for me, because I always think that we say the opposite of addiction is connection. I don't know if you've heard that term, but it's a very common one. I personally think it's more than that. The opposite of addiction is a spiritual connection. It's the being addicted to something is trying to fill a hole because we don't have something spiritual to work with, and we're living in a very agnostic, almost anti-religious, or I don't say anti-religious, but you know, I don't need religion, that kind of attitude. And I just think that that's not doing us well, because I always think when I see patients that are seeking help that yes, it's good to know about the neurochemistry, which we can talk about, but over the long term, in terms of the cure, or the not cure, but management, we're going to have to rely on a higher power or something spiritual to sustain it. So that's it. That I just love that we're already starting with that premise here in this talk.
Absolutely. And also something we have mentioned before is that the community is important.
Yes.
So if we want to get out of addiction, and it doesn't matter what type of addiction it is, we can't do it alone, and we need a community.
Yeah. And so we can look at the small picture, which is I'm eating too much sugar, or I'm drinking too much alcohol, or even coffee or work. But, you know, if we just look at that and understand that and stop that, okay, as a clinician, and I don't know if you're actually working with people one-on-one, but in the sort of primary model of treatment, you know, we can work with some of that, but the larger picture, how do you live now, thrive, happy? You need to have all these other things in place, like community and like I said, higher power and all that stuff. And, you know, we could just talk about how COVID, for example, is just eroding away that whole secondary, larger picture, you know, as we're more and more isolated.
Absolutely, completely agree with you. Also, I think when it comes to addiction, whatever addiction it is, there is something more is missing in life.
Yes.
Is that right? Do you agree?
Yes. Yes, that's it. That's it exactly. Yeah. And we can stick with the, well, I'll be missing my cigarettes, or I'll be missing my booze or my sugar, but it's really much larger than that, because we picked up those things in the first place.
I never thought I was addicted until like I just thought that I have overcome my addictions. But after reading your book, I have realized that I am an addict, because I have just swapped addiction for addiction.
Yes.
So when I said about the drugs, then I said about the smoking, and then I said about coffee. Obviously, coffee is still my, there you go. Cheers. Coffee is still my main addiction. But and then I swap cigarettes for sugar. And I see this everywhere, so many people around me. And then also the alcoholism, right? So alcohol contains sugar. So that is a kind of a sugar addiction.
So I can say, you know, addiction is a spiritual dilemma, but right from the beginning, it's actually a neurochemical dilemma first. So we could, like, you want to unpack that first. It's just that that's not enough, but that is the beginning, because that will help a person understand why this is happening. You know, and so many people say, I should stop. I know I should stop. I'm going to get cancer. I'm going to get diabetes, whatever it is, and I can't stop. And there's a reason why you can't stop, and it's because the circuitry, the brain circuitry in the brain, which includes dopamine and serotonin and endorphins, has been rewired, neuroadapted to a toxic environment. You know, so dopamine, for example, is our neurochemical of excitement and thrill, and I'm looking forward to this cheesecake that I'm going to have, and it's so super exciting. It's never as exciting as the actual experience of eating the cheesecake, but we look forward to it. I remember when I was, quote, in the food, you know, eating compulsively, I would be eating thinking about the next bite rather than enjoying the bite that was in my mouth at the time. And that's the dopamine surge that's happening in the brain. And normally that wouldn't happen if I was eating an apple. I just don't care about the next bite of the apple, because I'm actually enjoying the apple. But when it's something else, like apple crumble or something like that, then I'm moving ahead in the game, because the concentrated amount of sugar gives me a concentrated amount of dopamine. An apple gives me dopamine too, but not in that high concentration. So that high concentration, if I live there too much, I neuroadapt. I need that apple crumble just to feel good. And then, of course, I need 2 apple crumbles, and then I need 3, and then forget the food and the apples, just give me the crumble and whatever. That's all neuroadaptation. And that's it. I don't care if it's the Dalai Lama with super whatever powers of willpower. This is, if you're an animal, a human brain living in this environment, this is what happens. And how you get out of that is you have to step out of that environment. that's the whole concept of recovery. So that's the dopamine. It's a neurochemical change. And then we have serotonin, which is the neurochemical of satisfaction. I have enough, I'm good, I'm grateful, I'm connected. And often people will drink alcohol, for example, or eat sugar because they're come to a party, they're nervous, they're not really comfortable until the booze is flowing and the desserts are out. And then it's like, oh, I'm good, now I'm good. And that's, that's the serotonin, the social lubricant that helps. And then endorphin is the neurochemical that in our body that numbs and gives that sense of pleasure and satisfaction that happens after you've eaten a full meal. Sometimes people call that the it's not the want, it's the like, it's the it's the joy. I am enjoying this, and I can enjoy roasted Brussels. That's what I had for lunch, but I'm not having enjoyment of my food when I'm thinking about it ahead of the game, because it's all out of whack. So these things, and then you get a neuroadaptation there too, so that if I don't have my ice cream is a great example of where you get a lot of endorphin plus dopamine. If I don't have that, I'm going to actually feel uncomfortable, painful. My bad day is going to feel even worse, and I need to have something to. It's like having the shot or the glass of wine at the end of a rough day. Instead, I have a big plate of something at the end of a rough day. And what am I getting there? It's that endorphin, fuzzy, it's all warm, it's all okay. And we become neuroadapted to that, because that wouldn't happen with a real plate of Brussels sprouts. And that piece, that's where addiction starts, because once you become neuroadapted and you need more, then you need more just to feel normal. And then when you don't have it, you feel worse. That's how that starts. It's entirely related and a consequence of the food. It's just that some people, me, possibly you, are more inclined, because you have a history, you mentioned, of other addictions. So you're already primed for the food because it started somewhere else. I mean, that addiction of dopamine and endorphin and serotonin got started somewhere else. It's not just sitting fallow, it's waiting for the next thing to come on the scene, which in your case then was sugar after your cigarettes and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my case, it's dopamine. So after I read your book, I have realized that I have addiction. I'm addicted to dopamine.
Yeah.
So anything what gives me dopamine, that's what I require. And if I don't have it, I get stressed, I get grumpy, my mood gets affected. So if bored, I didn't exactly, I'll get bored. Yeah, absolutely. I just need that excitement, and I think that's why I was addicted to drugs a long time ago. But what I want to say over here is that when dopamine, serotonin, and endorphin is balanced, then addiction doesn't exist, correct?
That's right. Yes. So if you can get out of that circuit, out of that loop, of I need more to feel normal. Well, if I don't have more, then I won't feel normal. In fact, I'll feel bad. If you can get out of that loop, because you're going to feel bad, and that will take, if you actually stop it, if you stop the sugar, just like you quit the cigarettes. I mean, having one or two less a day, it just prolongs the agony. If you can just stop the sugar, stop the whatever it is, it takes about 3 or 4 weeks to kind of reclimatize, adapt the brain. It never goes back to normal, but at least you're out of that loop. And then if you start to do the balancing things, like just have dopamine where it fits in nature, like you are now, instead of hitting a crack pipe, you're doing a podcast. Like, that's exciting, that's nerve-wracking, but it's not that kind of nerve-wracking that somebody who's using a stimulant would have, right? If you find the natural ways, and if you're somebody who's inclined to be dopamine, you might actually want to go out and, do some kind of crazy jumping off of mountains or mountain climbing or something like that. That's not that, I wouldn't want to do that, but that's the person who would do that, but it's still natural. And if you can find that, nature has a very nice way of keeping things balanced. And if you just follow that, it's just like, if somebody says, well, what do I eat? Just eat real food, and the balancing is already built in. Now, if you're an addict and you've already been way on this extreme of just eating the apple crumbles or just drinking too much and all that kind of stuff, you have to be careful, because we have with addiction memories now that are very potent, and the memory, we call it euphoric recall. Oh my God, I smell that cheesecake and I really miss that, even though I haven't had it for a year. At the moment I smell it, I'm thinking about it. Like, that's something that somebody who hasn't had that problem, they're just going to go, yeah, it smells like cheesecake, so what? Like, we have to live with a memory, and a lot of addiction work is recognizing this is a chronic condition. As long as I'm not eating that stuff, I'm okay, but I have to be careful not to let myself talk myself into, I'm okay, I've been okay, so now I can have a piece of cake, you know, a little bit on the weekend. It's my birthday. Even though I haven't for a year, I'll have one once a year for my birthday. That's an addict cannot do that. They simply cannot do that.
Can we talk about the sugar addiction before we dive into the spiritual connection?
Yeah.
So we know that sugar is addictive. We know that sugar is drug.
Yes.
We know that sugar supplies us with the serotonin and endorphins and
all three of them.
Dopamine. It gets us high. We know it affects our mood. We know it's cause of cancer.
Yeah.
We know all this. Why do you still have a sugar everywhere?
Why does it still exist everywhere, or why do we still eat it?
Why do we give it to children? Do you know what? I know you have this Facebook page, and it was so funny, because when I went through your Facebook page, I came across this comment, and there was this woman. She said, I know sugar is a drug. I know sugar is very similar to cocaine.
Yeah.
But I got asked from school to make my daughter cupcakes or something. I don't know, something. So why do we give our children? Why do I get asked to give my child a drug?
Well,
so I found it was very nicely worded.
Yes. It's because, I mean, that's the reason why podcasts like this are so important. And when people ask me to speak, I really want to, because until we recognize that sugar is as evil, as problematic, even more problematic than other drugs, we're just going to go, that's just Vera, that's just Barbara, whatever. But we say, no, it's not. And the fact that we're giving it to kids, we're even letting kids choose. Like, I hear some people who are trying to be very fair say, well, I'll explain this to my child and I'll let them decide. Well, they're not, of course they're young brains are, sugar is actually the promise of energy dense, potent food, and the brain wants that because it's growing. It's a growing brain. But luckily, my growing brain, I'm older than you, lived in an environment where that sugar wasn't as plentiful as now. I simply don't need what's available now. So we have to put the curbs on. But is it the sugar industry? The sugar industry does not win with this message. They want the kid to make the choice. They want the mom to make the choice, and the mom will break down if the kid screams in the grocery lineup. To say, okay, take it, because I can't stand the screaming. Why is it there in the first place in the grocery lineup as you're waiting to pay cash? That's an intentional thing. So, it's the sugar pushers. The industry are pushers. They're just like the person who's quit their cocaine habit, and then they have their dealer call and say, I'll just give you a little bit for free. Come on, one more time. Do one for the road. And then they're back again. I mean, it's until we recognize how potent this is. I'm not saying that they're truly evil. I think that there is a selected ignorance that's happening amongst the sugar industry, and also to some degree in the public. Because I've had people say, I can't say no to my grandmother. She's going to make me a loaf of bread. I can't. She made it for me. How am I going to say no? Well, if she gave you a pipe full of opium, you'd say, excuse me, no. But, we don't see that. We have to change the mindset. And the only way we're going to do that is to have conversations like this. It's a pain relief.
It's a pain relief. Thank you very much for that word. Yeah.
That's the endorphin effect. In fact, I'm not Jewish, so I actually have not seen this, but I've been told that you give the kids sugar before when they're having a circumcision, like if they're at a certain age, not if they're older, but if they're like under the year of whatever it is, 2 years or 1 year or whenever it is that's done, you give a little bit of sugar because it has an endorphin effect. The kid has not at that point had enough sugar that they've habituated, so that little bit of sugar it works like a bit of a Percocet or some kind of minor opiate.
Yeah. So most of the population is addicted to sugar because it's been given to us since we were little.
I think that the more recent children are much more addicted than my generation was, and certainly my grandparents' generation. I think it's just getting worse. And you mentioned children, and that's the part where I get very upset, because there they are relying on us adults to train them, and we've got this permission around sugar that's a very bad match. And we are literally seeing kids now getting diabetes in their teens and in their 20s, obesity, premature developments. Like, in my age, I'm sorry, I guess I'm getting older. I seem to be saying this a lot. Young women had puberty in the age of 13, 14. Now it's like 10, 11, and that's all thanks to the food that we're eating. So it really worries me. And then, of course, the addiction piece. We're calling that attention deficit disorder. We're calling that all sorts of names that I would really like to see a nutritional focus first before we reach for the medication.
Yes, and also we have the hyperglycemia. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, and very very high risk of a diabetes too in children and most of the population, and that it comes to obesity, which leads to depressions and all that kind of stuff. So that is a kind of a vicious circle. So now we have all this in front of us. There has been studies done. There have been incredible people like you writing all those books. Why is nothing happening? Oh. Well, actually, that's just personal opinion. I just want to hear from you.
Actually, the good news is something is happening. But it's a slow process. It's kind of like if you look at the day in the life of, it doesn't look like much is happening. But in the tobacco story, even in the opiate story, with the opiate crisis where everybody's dying now because of the fentanyl. I mean, that kind of opiate crisis started in the 90s, and now it's 2020. Not much has happened, but actually a lot has happened. People are starting to respond to that now. The tobacco awareness of cancer and the whole fight with the food industry, the tobacco industry, which by the way moved into the food industry. We're having the same battle. I mean, how long did that take? 30, 40 years? But a big change happened. I know more people now who have quit smoking than who smoke. In fact, I now go, oh, you still smoke, with surprise. One day, we're going to have people eating their dessert outside on the deck rather than inside. If you want that stuff, you can go outside and eat it. I'm looking forward to that day, but we're not there yet. But the fact that more people are talking about this, there's more, like Robert Lustig and Gary Tobes. There's people out there, journalists, who are writing about this. I don't think we're at the tipping point yet, but we almost are. And then we're going to start seeing. The next step is legislation and whatnot. It's not happening yet, but we're talking about it, and that's a big difference than 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So this also, we need the larger picture to keep holding on to hope.
Yeah. Also, like the sugary drinks has been removed from UK schools and all that kind of stuff. So no, there is definitely changes happening. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So how do we overcome the addiction?
Well, yeah. So here's the thing. The first fundamental thing, and people don't like to hear this, is you have to identify what the trigger food is, and that is definitely going to be, or whatever the trigger is, whether it's cigarettes or whatever. But in this case, food. It's going to be sugar. You got to stop the sugar. And people will all who are struggling with this will say, "How about we can just cut it down?" And no, you can't. You're just prolonging the agony. It's just so much easier. And believe me, it's easy. It is easy. For those of you who are listening going, I don't think I can do this. For 3 or 4 weeks, you will feel that way. And then it will be like, oh my God, I can't believe how easy it is. I haven't eaten sugar for more than 15 years and I don't miss it. It's like, good. But initially it was like, oh my God, I don't know how I can do this. So abstinence of the trigger food, sugar, and oftentimes I'm going to say, if you really want to be clean, just take out processed foods of any, or processed carbs of any kind. Because a lot of people say it's not sugar addiction, it's processed carb addiction. You can still eat apples, you can still eat broccoli. If you want to go keto, which is really cutting down your carbs, you can do that too, but you don't have to. But stop the offending drug, which is sugar and processed carbs. Then what we said earlier, connection. Because what are we actually doing? We're filling something. I mean, sugar, food is an emotional balm. It's a soothe. But what are we soothing? We're soothing, you know, what I know for myself, and I'm going to imagine a lot of people here, especially during COVID, are thinking, you know, it's okay. I don't want to socialize. I'd rather be at home watching Netflix with my tub of ice cream and my big, whatever it is that I've baked. I'm good. I'm independent, I'm fine, I'm good until the next morning when I hate myself. But then I'll buy another tub of whatever it is and watch the next show. But when you stop that, I mean, we are social creatures, and we need to fill that space with connection. And just like the other 3 or 4 weeks, and what felt like maybe an intrusion, you know, a bit of social phobia, I don't know what to say. Once you start letting people in and letting connection in, it is so much more filling and sweet than real sweet. And there's no hangover later.
How about things like, now is very popular, is those naked bars. So is like fruit, dry fruit with nuts. So would you say that that is very high on sugar as well, and it is not beneficial?
Well, so the thing is that nature has made things so that they have their own curb. So dried fruit is better than processed candy for sure, but I mean, and it's still got its fiber. So you're still eating the fiber. Like juice is worse because you've taken the fiber out, and you've taken, you've enabled, you know, instead of being only able to eat 2 oranges, you're eating 10 in the juice. If you do dried, you're taking out the fluid, so that, you know, it's the fluid and the fiber in the skin that actually make it so that you can only really eat 2 apples at most. And you don't want that much, because apple has fructose in it. The brain does not process fructose. It doesn't fill you up. It just goes to the liver and puts fat, what we call visceral obesity, fat on your belly and in other places that you don't want. So you want to only have a certain amount of that, and the natural product does that. If you have dried fruit and it is equivalent, so that would only be like less than half of a handful for the day. And people will, you know, take tons of that stuff. So I would actually say eat the real stuff, and I'm actually fine with nuts if you can manage them. Some people find that if they eat nuts, cashews or peanuts, they'll eat the whole thing. But if you can have just a few and a little bit of fruit, I prefer the real thing, it's fine.
Thank you. Okay, can we go back to the community now? What you were saying, how important the community is, and what can we gain from a community?
Well, the community is what gives us mainly our serotonin. So the opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of addiction is dopamine overload. That's what we were talking about earlier. As a result, if you have this overload, you're going to have to really beef up, or it's a funny word to use here, you're going to have to really bolster up the serotonin, because you've got an overload of dopamine. You kind of almost want, like, it's sort of like dopamine is the want and serotonin is the have. And so if you've got a high want, you want to have a high have to kind of balance it off. And so that will be connection, but it has to be good connection, like one-on-one, we're listening to each other and connecting, not just, you know, we're in the same room, not talking. Or meetings, like 12-step meetings, or if you have a support group somewhere and you're participating in that. So it may feel in some cases false, a false community, I mean, false, like a forced community, like you go to church and there's a lot of people you would normally not talk to, or AA meeting and you wouldn't normally talk to them, but it's nevertheless, it's a bolstered up connection of serotonin. Before COVID, I would say to people, if you're really shy, then, you know, there were coffee shops that you could go to and you just sit with your computer. Even just being in a room full of people is better than being in your own room by yourself. We're social animals. We need to be with, we need to feel, body feel. This, I'm really worried about COVID because this isolation is not good for us. Not good.
Yeah, especially some people are working from home, aren't they? And they're saying, "Oh, I'm loving this life. This is brilliant. I don't want to go back to work." But I don't think it's going to happen. I think people eventually will go back.
Yeah, because we're social animals. And if they're loving this life, I want to ask them, for how long are they going to love the life? And if they love it for a long time, okay, maybe I'm biased here, but I'm going to say, can I see what you're eating? Are you starting to get your serotonin need that you would get from your contact now through a drug? You know, are you getting it some other way? Because we need this stuff. Like, we need it. This is how we're built. So yeah.
Let's talk about the spiritual connection.
Yeah. So the spiritual connection is the larger picture. And the thing about the spiritual connection is, I mean, you know, I think it kind of answers all of the above, the dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins. But if nothing else, it will give us our endorphins, you know, our sense of meaning, our sense of joy, our sense of, I have to suffer the trials of life. The only way I can do that is if I can somehow make my suffering meaningful, maybe by telling other people, like we're doing here, you know, sharing our own story so others can relate. That's a kind of spiritual act, and it makes my pain and your pain meaningful. That's an endorphin. Just the sense of joy in things. Like, why do human animals have joy? I don't know if you've been introduced to the concept of peak experiences through Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of needs. You know, he talks about peak experiences. That's the same thing that we're talking about. You know, we need a few of those in a lifetime to keep us going. You know, it was the one day when the skies opened up and I could feel connected with God and everything. I mean, it's just one day that happened, maybe in childhood or when you're in love or something like that. And you remember that, and that gets you through the hard times. And well, we need that. So we have to build that in. And
I think there is a connection which is lost, what we had within ourselves. So something what you have when you were little, and you know yourself very well, right? Yes. And then you're going to school and you're meeting friends and you kind of building up your social skills, and you kind of going further and further and further away from yourself.
Yes.
And then you're looking for things. So you reach out for addictions because they will kind of fill those holes in.
Yes, that's right.
I think it's all the way round. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
It's like we need to go backwards to kind of fix it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do. Yeah, and yes, and it doesn't really matter how that's done. Although there's some features about a spiritual practice that are common amongst all of the different spiritual practices. And you know, one of them is connection and community. You know, whether it's Salvation Army or it's even the Moonies, I don't care, or the nuns, like they, you know, have the same common outfit, a declared common doctrine. AA is the same thing. You have the 12 steps, have ways to identify with your stories, something that connects. That's the serotonin piece. And in all of those, there's always a sense of mission or a sense of meaningfulness. I want to help others, and that's the endorphin piece. That's really crucial. And you'll see that a lot of spiritual programs have that. They have the connection, they have the sense of meaning and purpose. And then the other thing is that sense of, you were kind of alluding to this with children, that sense of the joy of just the here and now, you know, and that appreciation. Well, like we started, what do you appreciate today? Like, that appreciation in the moment is also fundamental in all spiritual practices, and we have to have that too. That appreciation is serotonin.
It's incredible how everything is connected, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we need it. We need it as creatures, as animals. I mean, why is it there in the first place? other than to serve us. And, you know, we live in a society where things have been so torn apart. There's little connection. Things are becoming more and more divided, which works against serotonin. The only way we get joy is through substances. We have to find a way to bring it back. And I'm always encouraged when I hear somebody, when they put down their drug, say that they've got connection and a sense of purpose. Like, I think they're going to make it. They're going to make it. It's the ones that say, I don't know, that I worry about.
That's why I love your book, because it's everything what we just talked about, everything is just very well explained, is very well presented.
Oh, thank you.
It was, I don't know what chapter it was, but you were talking about, it was like you're asking those questions. Are you an addict? And then a question goes like, and I was just reading question, every single question, I think it was about the food addiction, every single question are answered with yes.
Yeah.
And then I started laughing, and then he says something like, if you answered more than 3 questions or something like that. And I'm just thinking, and I started laughing even more. I says, this is hilarious. Every single question. This is not like more than 3, all of them. I said yes. And I recognize this in my friends as well. And I know that they would answer yes as well. So it's so important for everybody to get a hold on to this information. And especially when you're talking about the serotonin, endorphins, and dopamine, you're also talking about the food. The certain food we get serotonin from certain food, endorphin from certain food.
Yes, right.
And there is lack of it in different people. So,
yes, that's right. Yeah. Some people are more deficient in some areas and are not so much in other areas. And, you know, I actually spoke with somebody today. I wanted to say to him, you're actually the rare person. I think he was thinking I was more the rare person, but he was somebody who said, oh, I can just have a little bit and put it down. No problem. And I have enough of, I guess, connection and, you know, whatever out there. But I don't think that's the norm today. I think that we're all, a lot of us really suffering in this very alienating society. And, you know, what's the solution beyond just my personal, private, you know, abstain and look for connection? It's to foster and applaud, you know, so when somebody says, I want to quit, say, good for you. Like, just like we would say when someone wants to quit drinking finally, or they want to stop smoking cigarettes, we say, good for you. If we could do the same thing when they say, I want to quit sugar, and have a quit sugar party, which might be that everyone brings roasted Brussels sprouts instead and says, try my tasty food, you know, like, wouldn't that be nice? And have a connection that way. That's, you know, very celebratory.
Can you talk about your addiction and your personal journey?
Yeah, so my story is that, you know, I grew up in the 70s, the 1970s, when the whole concept of food addiction, forget it. I mean, I didn't even know what addiction. I mean, I knew there was addiction because I had seen alcoholism, you know, all around me as a teenager. But I lived in the time when the concept of eating disorder was just getting recognized professionally. You know, we had the Carpenters. There was Karen Carpenter, who died of anorexia. I don't know. Anyway, it was just starting to be on the scene. And I just know that when I, as a teenager, decided I wanted to stop drinking, I don't think I was willing to quit smoking cigarettes, but it was just like, I'm going to stop and be clean. I also decided, well, I'm going to stop eating junk food. And I discovered that because I didn't really know sugar addiction, I thought, I'm going to stop eating all this stuff, but I'm still going to let myself have just a few jellies, like just a few in the day. And even if it means I can't eat other food, I'm going to calorie count in such a way that I can eat these and knock out everything else. Because I was like into the eat like 800 calories a day kind of thing. But I was eating the most addictive thing. And when you're starving, it's even more addictive. And so what ended up happening was, before I knew it, it was binge purge cycle. And that binge purge cycle, which now we would call bulimia or binge eating disorder, then people were just starting to use those words. many years later, when I became and was 100 pounds more than I am now, still struggling with either eating or using alcohol as well. It's kind of like a mix and match. It just hit me one day when I got into the field of addictions that this was more like addictive behavior than an eating disorder. You know, it looked the same. You know, that whole thing of I'm obsessing about it all day, even when I'm not eating it. It's on my mind, ever present. And when I decided to treat it like an addiction, then, you know, I knew when you stop an addiction, you sit through post-acute withdrawal. It's a 1 month process, 3 to 4 weeks, and then it gets better. And that's exactly what happened. And that was reinforced in my story. And then I could see it in others, that if I had just a little bit, because I was good for 3 months, so now I can have a muffin, then I would eat the whole tray of muffins the next day. So I knew this is an addiction. And that was around the same time that I started hearing people write about it, like in the science. And it just carried on from there. Yeah. So like many of us in the field, I had my own struggle for many years. And then I was just so like gobsmacked when I realized that I could lose 100 pounds and keep it off. Not yo-yo back and forth, keep it off, and no longer obsessed. That's when I thought, I have to say something about this. And as an addictions doctor, I have those credentials. And then now I'm meeting more and more people, which is where the hope comes in. There is a message that's getting spread.
How many years did it take you to overcome your addiction?
Once I recognized that it was, or that I was going to treat it that way, I would say, it was a process. So I would say a year, because I quit sugar first, like I guess 15 years ago. And then maybe 5 years later, and that was fine. I lost like 80 pounds. I felt better, but I still kind of obsessed, not as much though. And then I thought, I'm going to cut out the flour too. I'm going to cut out all the, I mean, I still thought that popcorn was okay. And you know, muffins that were, I don't know, low carb or something. I don't know. I don't remember what I would eat then. Anyway, when I stopped all of that and just went to the veggies and grains, that made a big difference. And then about 6 years ago, because I became menopausal, I decided I'm going to cut out the grains. So this is a process. Not everybody has to go that far. But so I wasn't eating sugar, I wasn't eating flour, and then I cut out all the grains. So that's no more oatmeal, that's no more quinoa. And that just made things even better. So I guess the long answer is it took 15 years, but it really did. I noticed the difference in a year or less. Like,
so what do you eat now?
I have some fruit. So I have some blueberries in the morning. I do eat yogurt. I'm not a vegan. Not very much. Like I'm portion out what I eat. So I eat a bit of yogurt. I have a tiny bit of chicken, like maybe 2 ounces in a day, not very much. Mainly my protein is dairy, mainly. And I eat a lot of vegetables. So I eat a lot of cauliflower. I eat a lot of Brussels sprouts, lettuce, tomatoes, that stuff.
And you don't experience any hunger?
No, the only time I experience hunger is in the morning after the fruit. And so I've cut down that. And the only reason why so I would actually like not to eat the fruit. I don't experience hunger between my meals, with the exception of what I call appropriate hunger. So if it's been 4 hours, I'm not somebody who's fat loading like keto. A person who follows keto will eat a lot of fat so that they're not hungry at all. I'm not doing that. I'm so that by hour 4 or 5, I'm hungry, but it's appropriate. It's not starving crazy. Just like by the time it's dinner time, I'm hungry, but not like crazy. I can wait an hour or two if I had to. The only time I get actually hungry is after breakfast with the fruit, and I would not eat the fruit except that I belong to a program where they encourage fruit, and the support that I get from the program is worth that little bit of hunger, if you know what I mean.
What are your thoughts on honey?
Honey is fruit. Pardon me, is fructose. So it's in nature, honey would come from the bee hive, and the bear that scoops out is not in that be high for very long. I'm just thinking about molasses, you know, in the tree or whatever. Like if it's in its natural element, you would get very little. But when you squirt it in, it's far too condensed. So when we say no sugar, we also mean no honey, no maple syrup. And there's even the question about stevia. Like, you know, it's a sweetener, it's a natural sweetener. Some people can do it, but others can't. Anyway, it's got to do with, it's just simply too much fructose.
And how about the carob syrup? Are you familiar with carob syrup? Because that is advice for people who suffers from diabetes.
Well, you know, it's how is that different than corn syrup, which is high fructose corn syrup? It's a condensed, I know, because carrots are, you know, it's like beets, you know, they have natural sugars in them, but eat the carrots in the carrots. If you take in the syrup, you're now extracting the fructose from the carrot, and now you've made what is a intoxicant to a toxin. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
Intoxicant meaning, oh, I love these carrots. They're so sweet. When you roast them, they're nice. To it's actually now a drug. It's potentiated.
You know, when you were talking about the what you are eating now and what you have stopped eating, do you know what kept coming to my mind?
What?
I wanted to ask you, but what makes you happy? Constantly. My question, what makes you happy? It's another confirmation of a food addiction. But it's just, it's funny because I'm just thinking, how do you get happy if you don't?
But you know what?
How do you get happy?
The thing is this is a phrase that I love. Hunger is the best chef. Or the best sauce. Like if I'm appropriately hungry and I don't have the expectation of something like a cheesecake or some kind of cake or something, because I haven't had it for so long. I can't tell you how much pleasure I get from roasted Brussels sprouts. Like they're just amazing. You know, my partner made it and I just kept saying, oh my God, they're so good. The crisp and the roast, they're wonderful. And that's how I used to talk about cheesecake. Like, how did you make this wonderful cheesecake? Like it's like they say salt. If you don't have salt, then your taste buds adjust. You will adjust so that simple pleasure of a ripe apricot is like, it's like heaven, like it really is. And the thing is when you have that cheesecake, I'm just saying that example because that was one of my favorite things. At the end, you kind of feel like, oh, I'm kind of dizzy, or it's too much, or I feel sick. None of that happens. So you get the pleasure of these things without knowing that you're not going to have the unhappy consequence later. You're just going to have to believe me on that one.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my last question for you is, where can listeners find you and get in contact with you?
Well, okay, thank you. So I have my book, Food Junkies, a recovery from food addiction, which you can get on Amazon, and please do. I have a website that's called addictionsunplugged.com. I have my Facebook group, which I love people to join on. It's of course free, and that's called I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life. And we have a new podcast that's also called Food Junkies. I think it's just called Food Junkies, maybe Recovery from Food Addiction. And that's on iTunes and Spotify. So there's lots of ways you can get me or find out more.
Thank you for listening. I hope you have enjoyed this episode and that you have gained a lot of information. As I have just launched this podcast, I have decided to give 2 lucky listeners a free psychic reading each month for the period of next 3 months. These readings will be a combination of a tarot and a psychic channeling. To enter, all you need to do is leave a review in the iTunes store, take a screenshot of it, send it to me on barbaramayShow@gmail.com, which is BARBRAMAYSHOW@gmail.com. As you may already know, reviews are very important for podcasts, and they will help podcasts to expand and direct the important topics discussed to the appropriate audience. At the end of every month, I will announce the winner on my Instagram, which is @TheBarbaraMayShow. So keep your eyes peeled, and I cannot wait to see you on the next episode.